Hello everyone, Mr. Gentleman here. The new year has begun, but I want to talk a little about the best games I played last year. Except that there is a tiny problem. I didn't play too many games from the last year. I actually spent most of it going through my bucket list, clearing games I've always wanted to play while playing and replaying a lot of old SNES games. I didn't even get to play the latest Etrian Odyssey game, so I can't do a list of the best and worst RPGs of the year, but I can at least talk about the things I've played in general, including whatever RPGs I did chance upon. I'm going to open and close with my two favorite games from the last year. First up is Sekiro. Perhaps not a RPG, at least not a traditional one, and if it is more of a side grade one than an upgrade one. Though the fact you can get a strength upgrade after every boss does remind me of Chrono Cross. Sekiro is perhaps a little more flawed than, say, Bloodborne, and yet I think I enjoyed it and liked it more. The way combat worked with you having to deflect enemy sword swipes, while enemies deflect you and damage being more based on creating a breakthrough, was something I've always dreamed of in a game, and it was great to see it in action. Everything with overwhelming enemies with onslaughts or breaking their guard to having to figure out the intricacies of each boss left a really strong impression on me. On top of that, there were specific actions, such as having to leap over certain attacks and dodge often. And while you could just dodge them all, you'd be missing out on prime counterattacks. It was also the hardest of the Soulsborne games. Early on I actually despaired as to whether or not I could really beat the game, but I found myself becoming better and better, and the sense of achievement I felt when I both beat the game and also got the Platinum Trophy left me in a state I rarely get to feel. Next up is Cadence of Hyrule, an action roguelike using Zelda 1's overworld style, where you have to attack using various Zelda weapons and tools according to the beat of the music. I was wondering how I do considering I have no rhythm at all, but the game gives you a lot of options, and while it was certainly a learning curve to understand how to do all the actions, I ended up getting really used to it. One of the best things in the game is that you could play through the entire campaign as Princess Zelda, which I did, and I really enjoyed her unique deflection ability. They managed to integrate a lot of the usual Zelda exploration concepts into this style of game really well. My biggest issue with it is that eventually certain situations became repetitive, such as particularly button-mashy situations when enemies were locked in corridors, which usually happened in dungeons which themselves became a bit boring as a result. Katanas Arrow is a game I really recommend to those who like twitchy side-scrollers. You play as a samurai, or so he claims, clad in his bathrobe in the modern day. The concept is that you have to clear a room of enemies who are mostly defeated in one hit. But if you are hit, you have to start the entire room over again. So each room becomes a puzzle which you essentially have to figure out. It's kind of like Hotline Miami if you've played that. There is an important bullet time mechanic to deflect bullets, but if you're really good, you can do so without using it. The visuals and music and sheer style of the gameplay made this such a slick game. And even if you never play it, listen to the soundtrack. I've been listening to it all year long. But all of this is tied together in one of the most fascinating stories I got to experience this year, where the main character is deeply affected by a drug which allows him to have special abilities that allows him to see the future. In fact, the game implies that each time you play a room, it's actually him thinking about how to clear it, each failure being a failed strategy in his head. And then you see a playback on tape, implying you never actually saw the action occur when it happens, just the planning and then the tape of the recorded aftermath, making this one of the most fascinating ties between gameplay and story I've seen yet. The remake of Link's Awakening was good. By no means bad, but not great either. It is in many ways faithful, and the best of it comes from whatever the original game had. But I do think the new art style, while good in its own right, perhaps doesn't fit the way I feel Link's Awakening should be portrayed. And there are other issues, such as the plotting walk, and how the removal of square screens exposes how small the world actually is. And the game itself is actually a lot easier than the original, though I admit I have not tried Hero Mode yet. The addition of Dampé's Dungeon Maker was also kind of boring, as it didn't allow for the flexibility that could make it fun. That said, even this version of Link's Awakening managed to be a fun ride regardless, and is yet another Nintendo entry in cute mascots doing cute things. Speaking of cute mascots doing cute things, we have Yoshi's Crafted World. While I did think Woolly World represented the franchise Origins gameplay better, this was pretty fun in its own right. There were a lot of neat little challenges, and they did a lot of fun things with the paper aesthetic. I'd say get it when it's on sale, But as you know, Nintendo games never go on sale. Not a new game, but one of my favorite experiences on the Switch by far was Splatoon 2. And this year, the Splatfests came to an end. This was a game that, when it started, was really Splatoon 1.5. But as it went on, it practically became Splatoon 2 and 3, advancing so much in its free updates. I'm such a huge fan of the gameplay loop, and I'm hoping we truly get another sequel soon. Judgement was a game I had been looking forward to for a long time, as I'm a huge fan of the Yakuza franchise. I've never been a huge fan of the Dragon Engine, but this is the best it's been. Yagami's mix of kung fu and wrestling made for such an incredible mix, making him feel so different from previous protagonists. Being able to leap off of walls into attacks, and the options this game gives for running moves made gameplay feel unique. And some of the environmental EX actions are some of the best in the series. It also has some of the series' best side content in drone racing and VR board games. The story, however, was merely good. It was by no means bad, but as a fan of Yakuza and Ace Attorney, I was expecting the craziest, most insane detective narrative I have ever experienced. But it never came anywhere close to hitting that mark I really wanted. Still, this is a high recommend for an action game.
After that, have a ton of tickets. Let's party!
Metal Wolf Chaos XD is not a new game. In fact, it's quite old. But thanks to Devolver Digital, we are getting it in the West for the first time. I love mech games, and it's always a blast to play a new one. While by From Software, this is not their most hardcore game, but is instead just based on causing sheer chaos. You play as the President of the United States. The Vice President has led a coup d'etat and has taken over the nation along with the military. Now you must liberate America with your giant patriotic robot. The game's customization and gameplay is rooted in the sheer amount of weapons your mech can carry around, allowing you to rampage against the coup d'etat forces, dual-wielding weapons of various kinds as you go along. This is also one of the funniest games I have played in a while, with some of the most incredible comedic dialogue around. The only complaints I have is that since the game tells you very little about how to play, you really have to get used to things by yourself. And if you die in a boss, you have to start the entire stage over. Also, the gunplay could have felt a lot better. The Collection of Mana. Again, technically not new games, though technically this is the first time we have received Trials of Mana in the West, and I'm thankful for that as it's one of the best games in the franchise. I'm really happy this collection came out because due to unfortunate events, I had lost my footage for Final Fantasy Adventure, but thanks to this I had a great reason to replay the game. And Trials of Mana is simply a masterpiece, with some of the best party synergy and class mechanics around, even if you do need a bit of research to really understand how to best play the game. And you're okay too, Secret of Mana. Dragon Quest Builders 2. What a ride I had with the game. And I do think that if I clear my goal for games I wish to complete in the near future, I will return to it. That game did so much to improve on the original, adding so many options and ideas that made the game such a creative force. As a result, it allowed for a lot of flexibility and let me fulfill a lot of things that I wish to do. Revamping the pyramid into my own citadel and really doing what I wanted to do in the desert was my personal highlight. But the biggest surprise was the legitimately great narrative. Dragon Quest II is by far the only game in the series I would consider bad, and yet somehow out of that Builders 2 manages to craft a sequel that was as legitimately satisfying as a mainline game. The whole story of Malroth and how they handled him was a worthwhile experience for sure. And the last thing I played this past year, and actually what I'm currently playing, is Saga Scarlet Grace Ambitions, which is tied with Sekiro as the best game I've played this year, though that's obviously subject to change. From my Final Fantasy II video, and you'll see sooner or later in my Saga video, I have a very contentious relationship with Akatoshi Kawazu. He's a mad genius with unique ideas that often go awry, but I do think this is one of his best games. It originally came out on the Vita in Japan only, but this past year they ported it to everything else, while also finally bringing it to the West. It is a very gameplay and lore-driven RPG. The game has quite a few staples from JRPGs and WRPG ideas, such as how choosing a main character will decide where in the world you begin, and each character having their own narrative, all taking place in a world marked by an ancient enemy known as the Firebringer. as well as the later fall of the Empire which opposed him. So much of the game is less based on a strong plot, and more of the side content you see on the way. In a way, the true story is more about the world than its main plot. The gameplay is highly addicting with a timeline-based battle system, but one that includes so many ins and outs that have to do with risk and reward, interruptions, countering, buffs, debuffs, delays, and sometimes intentionally slowing yourself down. I don't think I could do justice to the game in this small video, but be warned, like most Saga games, it can be very esoteric and require a ton of figuring out, along with a lot of trial and error and maybe even a bit of internet help, especially since the game is legitimately difficult, though it is at least comparatively more newbie friendly compared to previous titles. And while the game is very tough at times, it leaves you exhilarated every time you complete a fight. If you have the time for it, and it is demanding on time, and want a hardcore gameplay and lore-driven RPG, then Saga Scarlet Grace Ambitions is absolutely worth a try. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Please like and comment for the algorithm lords, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. If you would like to support the channel, you can give as low as $1 a month on Patreon. Thank you for watching, and God bless you all.